Hi, and welcome back to one of our online lectures here in world history. Today we're going to continue the story on classical Greece, and we're going to pick up the story after the defeat of the Persians in the Persian Wars. And so the outcome of that is the Athenian Golden Age. Really, this is when we see democracy flourish, we see philosophy flourish, but we also see some internal wars between the Greeks themselves. So we've got some interesting things we're going to look at here, post-Persians here in Greece. We've got one constructive response question we're going to look at today. The question simply just says, describe the Athenian Golden Age. And when we look at the next slide, we always look at our roadmap of what we're going to learn. This is what we're going to use to basically describe the Athenian Golden Age. So we're actually going to talk about both Athens and Sparta. So in the Athenian Golden Age, certainly we'll talk about the glorification of the Parthenon, we'll talk about democracy, we'll talk about philosophy, but this is where we kind of get part of Sparta's story, because Athens and Sparta eventually go to war against each other in the Peloponnesian War. And that factors into the Athenian Golden Age as well, and we'll tell you why as we progress through this lecture. We'll end with looking at the philosophers, three very important ones, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They change the way we think, the way we look at the world, and really kind of, we still use their line of thinking in the world today. So all of this is going to play into our question, describe the Athenian Golden Age. We'll be able to use a lot of good information to do so. All right, so let's set the stage and get right into this. The Greek civilization was a collection of city-states. We've made this point several times, and this map definitely shows us. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Argos, Thebes, there's a whole bunch of them. And because of that, they were never one unified empire. They were civilizations, sure, and they shared a lot of commonalities when it came to culture, worshiping the same gods, speaking the same language, trading with one another, things like that. But they were never ruled by one person, so they were never truly an empire. And Athens and Sparta are two of the best known of those cities. So Athens and Sparta were two of the most powerful city-states, but for very different reasons, as we're going to find out. And that's the uniqueness of the city-state. You can have different governments. You can have differences in your military, things like that. And Athens and Sparta are really going to be very different for those reasons. Athens is still a thriving city today. Very, very important city in Greece. The ancient ruins of many of their buildings are still there, but you've got this bustling metropolis built around it. We're going to talk a lot today about this. This is the Acropolis. And the Parthenon, which is built on top of it. You got a couple of different views here. And then this image below just kind of, again, shows you the modern side of Athens. But if we could travel back in time to see Athens, this is kind of what it would look like. You would see a lot of different temples here. I know these are kind of hard to read, but a lot of these are different temples to different gods. Here you've got the Parthenon up here on the Acropolis. Again, we're going to talk about that very soon. It wouldn't have been nearly as big as it is now, but it definitely would have been the beacon of everything Greek during its time period. Athens really kind of symbolized everything the Greeks stood for and were capable of doing. Another image kind of gives you the same idea. You've got some city walls in there, and again, some look at some of these temples. All right, so let's talk about Athens here. From 477 to 431 BC, Athens experienced a growth in intellectual and artistic learning. This was known as the Golden Age of Athens. And really, for something like this to take place, you have to have creativity, you have to have freedom, and certainly you have to have lack of war. And again, I make the point that by defeating the Persians, now the Persians weren't completely defeated, they weren't killed off, but they were basically sent packing. They went back home. Because of that, Athens is allowed to grow and prosper. Humankind tends to advance itself much quicker when it doesn't have to worry about this constant threat of war. You're not training troops or sending troops off to war and things like that. Now you can focus on the things back at home, creating art, creating architecture, writing poems, etc., etc., etc. And that typically flourishes during times of peace. One of the men who was really going to make Athens a very strong beacon for the culture of all of Greece is Pericles. Pericles held power in Athens for 32 years, and he had several goals. His first goal was to strengthen Athenian democracy. And this is really where we have to make sure we understand that democracy is more or less born here in Athens. We take it for granted today, but Athenian democracy was really unique, especially in the fact that it was direct democracy. That means everybody voted on everything. And of course, I should really make sure I'm clear. When I say everybody, it was, landowning male citizens. So certainly there was some drawbacks to who could actually vote. But you voted on every law. That's what direct democracy is. We don't do that today because it just doesn't make sense. If you needed a stoplight on a corner somewhere here in Elk River and we had to have a vote for it, we'd call the people out and have them vote. Well, we just don't have the time to do that today. So we elect representatives to make those decisions for us. So we have a representative democracy today. His second goal was to hold and strengthen the empire. And when I say empire, I don't mean in the traditional sense that they've conquered other regions. In a lot of ways, because of Athens' power, they had become the leader of something called the Delian League. It was an alliance system to fight the Persians. And that's what we reference when we talk about empire. So they have dominion over these other city-states in terms of how they're going to fight the Persians, but he doesn't rule those other city-states, if that makes sense. So it's just an alliance system, and he wanted to hold and strengthen that. He also wanted to glorify Athens. One of the things that a lot of public servants have done over the years in many different cities is build things to show off the might and creativity of their city. And so one of the things that Pericles decides to build is the Parthenon. And so this is a good example of Athenian architecture, but also just of Greek architecture. The Parthenon is one of the most recognizable buildings in all of the world, and it was built up on that Athenian Acropolis. An Acropolis is a fortified hilltop. They actually built up the hilltop to make it taller, leveled it off, and then you've got the Parthenon on top of that. I already mentioned direct democracy. That was introduced under Pericles. Again, it's a great idea. It gives power to the people. But in this day and age, in 2014, when you've got all sorts of laws and things that they didn't have, 2,500 years ago, direct democracy just isn't as easy to use in our day and age. But it was definitely a very big deal during Pericles' time. The other way you glorify Athens is you continue to hold dominion over that Delian League. I got a little ahead of myself, but here we have it. Pericles and Athens was head of the Delian League, which was an alliance system created after the defeat of the Persians. It's a strength in numbers kind of idea. The more city-states that can band together, the more likely they'll have success at having to fight the Persians. But again, after the Battle of Salamis, they no longer have to do that. So here is the Athenian Acropolis. You can see from these angles kind of on the sides, this is a hilltop that's been built up. And then you level it off here, and now you've got areas to build forts, to build temples, things like that. And the Parthenon itself is arguably the biggest, most beautiful, most recognizable temple that's ever been built. It was supposed to house a giant statue of Athena in there. That's not there anymore. It's long gone. But really a remarkable achievement in architecture. Would have been very, very expensive in its time, and not everybody liked it. But we've certainly seen it now as a symbol of the Greek civilization. All right, so we've talked about Athens. We need to talk a little bit about Sparta. Sparta is kind of like the distant cousin of Athens. Of course, it's Greek, but the similarities kind of end there. There's a lot of differences here. And certainly for those of you who've seen 300 will get some of these jokes. We watched a little bit of this in class, so I thought that was pretty funny. Oh, this next one's one of my favorite if you remember any of the Arby's commercials from a number of years ago. One of the lines in the movie is, "Tonight we dine in hell, and tomorrow I'm thinking Arby's." Of course, the last part is made up. So I think that's pretty funny with Sparta. We typically think of 300. A lot of us who've seen it think of 300. And there's a lot of truth to that. I think some of the things they show in that movie are very, very accurate to how Sparta was run, but they also make a lot of changes too. So let's talk a little bit about what Sparta was all about. Sparta was a military city-state. Athens definitely had a military, but Sparta was so much more a military state than any of the other city-states in Greece. So Sparta had the better army than Athens, but Athens had the better navy. And the reason for that is Sparta was landlocked. They didn't have access to open water, where Athens is right on the water. So naturally, Athens is going to build ships more than Sparta does. And that's going to matter later on. We're going to definitely use those 2 points as we get to talking about these two city-states and how they go to war here shortly. Because Sparta put such an emphasis on their soldiers and training their soldiers, and the fact that they had a much smaller population, they really weren't builders. I mean, sure, they built houses and a few temples and things like that, but there's not a lot of ancient ruins there left. You can see this image down here. It's nothing special. There's nothing that really stands out about ancient Sparta. We have a little bit of ruins and not much else, so we know that they didn't put a big emphasis on architecture and building. One of the advantages of not being on water is the fact that it makes you a little bit safer. So due to its inland location, Sparta could not be attacked by sea, which is definitely advantageous if you want to avoid being attacked by the Persians or later cases being attacked by Athens. And having seen a little bit of 300, we showed this previously in the unit, as we mentioned, Sparta really puts a high emphasis on training their men to be soldiers. And those soldiers were soldiers for life. You really dedicated your life to fighting and ultimately dying for Sparta. And that's different than most of the other city-states. The other city-states, if you were a soldier, you might have had another role, like being a farmer, a blacksmith, or something like that. Some of the soldiers in Sparta did that as well, but they considered themselves soldiers number one and soldiers for life. All right, we're going to end part one there. When we come back, we're going to see how both of these city-states, Athens and Sparta, go to war in something called the Peloponnesian War. So go ahead and hit stop and go ahead and then play part two.